Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I hope everyone is staying warm. Today, Extension Economist Dr. Courtney Bir will provide an update of COVID-19's impact upon the ag economy. You may ask questions through the chat window, which may be opened by clicking the chat button at the bottom of the screen. Dr. Bir, I'll turn it over to you now.
Great, thanks, Brent. So today I'm going to go over sort of a wide swath of COVID-related items. It's becoming really difficult to sort of tease out, what's COVID, what's not. We've been with COVID for quite a while now. So I'm going to go through probably, I would say, 3 different areas related to COVID. So the first thing that I'm going to start with is a little bit of an update for our status in terms of COVID. So right now in the state of Oklahoma, we're not doing great. This is the 7-day average from February 14th. So the CDC releases this 7-day average. Right now we are in the dark blue area, which is 39.5 to 55.9 cases. And this is adjusted per 100,000 people. Hopefully with the storm, one of the benefits will actually be that people are indoors right now, they're not getting together. So maybe we'll see a decrease in cases in the next couple of weeks. An interesting thing that's been happening recently, in the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of our rural communities actually had a better COVID scenario, right? So in the rural communities, there were less cases of COVID, there were fewer deaths related to COVID. A little bit after September, that sort of flipped. And so what you're looking at here, the green line is the non-metropolitan. And so that is, your rural areas, and that purple line is the metropolitan areas. And so what you see is early on in the pandemic, those cities and those urban areas had a lot of cases. The rural areas had very few cases. And, a little bit after September, those two things reversed. And so now we're seeing higher COVID cases in our rural communities, which is really kind of a negative thing for Oklahoma. So I'm going to briefly go over at a bird's eye view all of the different relief programs that have been happening that pertain to ag. I'm not going to go into extreme detail about these. I'll tell you, basically how much money was out there, if the program is still available to enroll in, and who you might need to contact. So one of the first programs in March of 2020, it was the CARES program, and that is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. That was $2 trillion in pandemic legislation. That's $300 billion in direct payments to Americans. So this is the program that sent you those checks that you received. And there was $500 billion in loans, and $100 billion were earmarked specifically for hospitals. This program is still ongoing. There's still pieces of it that are being sent out. And then the next program that we had, which is now closed, happened in April 2020, and that's the CFAP program. And this program provided $16 billion in direct support for ag producers where prices and market supply chains have been impacted. So CFAP 1 is now closed. We then in September of 2020 had CFAP 2. CFAP 2 is currently suspended. They're working on trying to figure out what they want to do with the new COVID-related programming. So right now, CFAP 2 is suspended. It was an additional $14 billion for ag producers who continue to face market disruptions and associated costs because of COVID-19. So now we're getting into PPP. The first round, which you'll sometimes hear called first draw, is currently closed. You can still make adjustments to first round PPP. So they've changed some of the rules a little bit. Actually, a lot of it has been changed in favor of ag because our financial records look a little different than the average business. And so they are allowing adjustments to be made to that first draw round of PPP if you do not already have your money and you have not already gone through the forgiveness process. So if you have your money and you've gone through forgiveness and you've submitted all that paperwork, you're locked in, you're done with the first round. If you have not yet submitted for forgiveness, there are some adjustments that can be made. So you should talk to your lender about that. The PPP first round was actually quite successful. It supported the employment of 51 million Americans, and more than 87% of those loans were for $150,000 or less, with an average loan size of $101,000. So there were a few problems early on in the program with really large companies taking advantage of this. You all heard the stories about those big restaurants, those big chain restaurants and things like that taking advantage of PPP. They made some adjustments to that, and the money actually ended up going to the people that they wanted to support, the small businesses. 15% of PPP loans went to a small business in a rural community. So that's great to hear from an ag perspective. So PPP round 2, this is going on right now. So this round includes $284 billion. You can apply if you did the first round. However, there are different rules if you are what they call a second draw person. So the rule book for this is over 100 pages. It's quite long. I recommend talking to your lender. You can contact me. You can contact the Small Business Association if you have questions regarding this, but it's really something that you and your lender need to work through. So the eligible groups for this second round include small businesses, independent contractors, and sole proprietors. You do not have to have employees to qualify for PPP if you are a farmer. If you are a farmer, the amount you receive is actually based on the gross income from your taxes. So that's a rule that's a little bit more specific in the second round that kind of opens it up more for ag. And the unforgiven portions have a 1% interest rate with a 5-year maturity. It's still open, so talk to your lender. This is my big disclaimer on PPP, failure to use the funds appropriately. So for PPP, you can't just use the funds for whatever you want. There's pretty strict rules. 60% of the funds have to be used for payroll, for example. So if you don't do it correctly, that will impact the forgiveness eligibility. And that's kind of the best case scenario. If they can prove that you're doing this on purpose, it can potentially be fraud. So that's kind of my warning about PPP. I do recommend that you talk to your lender. So the economic injury disaster loans, the EIDL, these are for small business owners, including ag businesses and nonprofit organizations. It's designed to provide economic relief to businesses that are currently experiencing a temporary loss of revenue due to COVID-19. The term is 3.75% fixed for businesses. It's different if you're a nonprofit. And the loan is for 30 years. It can be used for working capital and normal operating expenses. So this program is still going on. However, the forgivable advanced funds are gone as of when I checked yesterday. So those are gone, but the unforgivable loan portion of this program is still going on. You can roll some of this into PPP and get that forgiven. That's something that you should talk to your lender about. If you're going to do PPP and you've done EIDL, you need to make sure that you talk to them about that. So a little bit about the farm economy looking forward into 2021. So the net farm income is forecasted to decrease 9.8 billion, so 8.1% from 2020 to 111.4 billion in 2021. So inflation adjusted, that's about a $12 billion decrease or 9.7%. Before everyone panics, I have this note in here that we need to remember that net farm income for 2020 was very high. There was a 45.7% increase from 2020 to 2019. We're still saying projected because not everything is in yet. And I guess I should also mention this comes from the USDA. So a lot of this large increase in net farm income came from direct government payments. So this is excluding USDA loans and insurance indemnity payments. And these direct payments, which are mostly related to COVID, all of those programs we just talked about a little bit ago, is roughly $37.2 billion. So the majority of this increase from the previous year is from the ad hoc disaster assistance for COVID-19 relief. The net cash farm income is forecasted to decrease 7.9 billion, so 5.8%, to 128.3 billion in 2021. And inflation adjusted, this is a $10.4 billion decrease, which is roughly 7.5%. Again, before we all freak out, this is still projected to be above the 2019 historic average. So if you look at this chart from the USDA, so the orange line is the net cash farm income. The green line is the net farm income. We're way over on the far right-hand side. If you look at that, we're still above the average. It is going down from last year, but last year was incredibly high. So we just need to keep that in mind. Okay, so why did we have all these disruptions? In general, there were several moving pieces to this problem. So early on in the pandemic, consumers really changed their food buying behavior. So restaurants were closed to indoor dining or had limited capacity. There was a shortage of freezers and refrigerators as people tried to minimize shopping trips. And for the most part, the supply chains have recovered. But how much of this shopping behavior and eating behavior will stick? We simply don't know. Personally, I think that a lot of people increase their storage capacity at home by buying big freezers, by buying outdoor refrigerators, things like that. Those items, those big durable items will be in your house for several years. So I could see people potentially keeping more frozen meat, in their home, looking at, buying larger portions, maybe locally, like a quarter steer or half steer. That may be something that people are looking into now that they have this storage capacity that's not going away anytime soon. So kind of touching on that, this graph is courtesy of Daryl Peel. He maybe showed it in his presentation, I'm not sure. But specifically looking at beef, right here you see on the left the shutdown. And so beef production was still pretty good during the original shutdown. And then a lot of those shortages that you were seeing in terms of the grocery store was really coming from increased demand from consumers. Then there was this reduced slaughter period. So a lot of the slaughter facilities were experiencing high numbers of COVID cases amongst their workers, which was causing these plants to shut down. And so you saw this reduced slaughter. And so really you had two different items that were causing what people perceived as a shortage of beef. At this point, I think a lot of that has been worked out, but it'll be interesting to see if consumer behavior sort of stays the same or if it reverts back to a lot of people eating those different cuts of meats that they eat in restaurants versus at home. So this leads me to talk about how Oklahoma is using some of those CARES funds. So I mentioned the CARES program a little bit earlier in the presentation. One thing in particular that Oklahoma decided to do. So the Oklahoma Department of Ag, Food and Forestry received $10 million in grants to use for Oklahoma meat processors in particular. So the goal of this funding was to decrease Oklahoma's dependence on outside processing plants and to mitigate the consequences of processing plant shutdowns. So we saw those big plants have big spikes of COVID. The idea is if we had more local capacity, we would be able to, stop some of those supply shortages. The funds had to be used by the end of 2020 to expand or build processing facilities, and 36 locations were awarded money. So the verdict is still out on this program. Again, a lot of it has to do with, will consumers still want to purchase, those quarter steers, those half steers, things like that? Will this small scale facilities be able to kind of get over the economies of scale that those bigger facilities have, right? So it's very costly to have a small scale facility. So it's really unclear if this expansion will be something that sticks in the market or if it's something that, we support now and then it kind of falls to the wayside. So time will only tell if these, increase in small facilities will continue. So when we think about COVID impact, it's really impacted everything in life, right? So in ag, we like to focus on, food and ag products, and, we worry about COVID-19 impacting the consumer. So this is from a nationally representative survey that I just collected a few weeks ago. The number of respondents was 939 people. And I asked people to rank from 1 not impacted to 5 impacted. They could also choose 6, which was this does not apply to me. I asked them for a series of lifestyle statements. What was your impact? So the number one thing that was impacted was actually ability to execute travel plans. So at this point in the pandemic, people are just really feeling the pinch when it comes to not being able to travel. Number 2 was I took on education related responsibilities for my child. A lot of schools are not in person. I know we're not in person here today because of weather, but that's a completely different issue. They also felt that the ability to buy paper products, so toilet paper, paper towels, people are still struggling to find those things in the marketplace. Second/third was I took on responsibilities for an adult member of my family. Third place/fourth was the lack of childcare impacted my ability to work. So a lot of people are working from home, also trying to educate their children from home, and it's just causing a lot of issues. Happily for ag, we kind of fall in this 4th less important category. So illness in my family household from COVID-19 was ranked 4th, along with ability to find meat, milk, and perishable grocery items, and death of a family member from COVID. So the ability to find meat, milk, and perishable grocery items was pretty low on the list of things that were impacting people. It's important to note that, of course, this was self-reported, and it also did not include people who said, this does not apply to me. For the most part, people, buy meat, milk, and things at the grocery stores. That does not apply to me mostly was for the childcare type questions. So vaccine intention. So a lot of us want to get back to normal. A lot of people believe that the vaccine is the way to do that. And so this is Oklahoma and the surrounding states. So this is 146 people from that nationally representative survey. And it's kind of interesting to see people's intent to vaccinate. I think the piece to look at the most is that 35% of people do not intend to obtain the vaccine. So there's a lot of discussion about herd immunity and how many people we really need to have vaccinated for COVID to stop, being pretty much in the system and to stop these mutations from happening. So I'm not sure if 35% of people not taking the vaccine is high yet or low yet. I'll have to do some more analysis to determine that. So I'll have a current report coming out with a lot of this analysis in the upcoming next month or so. So the actual vaccine rate that we have going on right now, this is courtesy of KOCO. They have a vaccine tracker. Roughly about 11.3% of Oklahomans are vaccinated at this point. We are doing a pretty good job of getting the vaccines that we've been allocated out. So if you see this, we have 722,000 vaccine doses, and we've given out 620,000 roughly of those. I do think that the weather, this past week and a half has slowed down some of that vaccination effort, but hopefully we'll be able to get back on track. So looking forward, things that I'm thinking about, will consumers continue to eat at home and shop in grocery stores less frequently? So what people are doing right now is they're having one big grocery run every week, every couple of weeks, some people once a month. So you're seeing really large grocery bills that happen infrequently. People have shifted from dining in restaurants to not eating out at all to now there's a lot more delivery happening. It will be interesting to see if people will shift back to dine-in eating. That ends up changing the cuts of meat that people consume and other things like that. So that's kind of an important thing to watch out for. The other piece that is interesting is, will government payments continue? So I do think it is very important that if you qualify for these programs, that you take steps to, get those funds and use those funds appropriately. As a farm finance person, I do think it's also important to evaluate your financial situation without the payments. So if it's fine to take the payments, it's fine, to do those things, but then also off to the side, see what your finances would look like without those payments, so that you can kind of be aware if you actually have, some issues going on with your farm finances. And then, will the increased slaughter impact supply chains? So this is kind of a big point of discussion. A lot of us in the Ag Econ department actually have a paper coming out soon where we talk about these different things, but Oklahoma has made the effort to have increased local slaughter capacity. And it's just not clear at this point, how or if that might impact the supply chain. Any questions? I know we covered a lot of material pretty quick.
I did set it where everyone can unmute themselves and ask questions through the chat box. So feel free to ask over a microphone or through the chat window. Either way works.
Courtney, this is Greg Hartman in Beckham County. I may be a little confused on your slides there where you talked about the numbers that they were impacted from 1 to 5.
Yes.
Maybe I was confused. It said that traveling was the most impacted, but up here at the top it says the mean score says number 1 not impacted. Is that?
Yeah. So they sorry, I changed this to a rank.
Okay.
1 being most impacted.
Okay.
Mean score was they selected from 1 to 5.
Okay.
Yeah, that is confusing now that I see that.
I just want to clarify
that. I tried to make it easier for the reader. I translated that mean score to an actual ranking.
Okay, thank you.
There's a question in the, okay, no, that's just Brent.
Yeah, no questions, but as we always do with these webinars, as people are thinking about questions and stuff to ask, we do a short survey for each webinar to get some feedback and so to get a better feel for how we're doing and everything. So we appreciate viewers filling this out. It's very short and the link is shared in the chat box. Are there any other questions? Courtney will be glad to answer them for you guys.
I do want to thank everyone for showing up despite rolling blackouts and freezing temperatures and freezing pipes. It's nice to know that you're talking to some actual people. I'm sure a lot of people watch the recording as well, but it is nice to have people at the presentations.
Also, I'd like to say our next webinar will be on March 30th, also at noon, and it will be over resources for rural businesses. One of our extension specialists will be sharing that. So if there aren't any other questions, I would like to thank everyone for joining us and say goodbye for now, and we will see you on March 30th. Thank you.
Thank you.